Hello, everyone. Thank you so much again to Lupus LA for having me. My name is Tanya. Thank you so much for the audience joining in for this Lupus LA live. Today, we are talking about dietary triggers and replacements. If you had joined in on my previous session about 2 weeks ago, we just started talking about kind of the general what sort of diet and nutrition is helpful for the whole family. And now we're taking a deeper dive. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. My name is Tanya. I am the Lupus Dietitian. And today's topic is a really, really popular one. So I get asked these questions all of the time on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok, text message. Whoever is asking me questions about lupus nutrition is usually saying, well, I heard this thing of one food or another food that I shouldn't be consuming. What do you think? So you are 100% in the right place if you want to use diet to help you feel better. If you have tried a lot of things and are really tired of just doing an experiment on yourself of trial and error, of eliminate one thing, reintroduce something else, and are frustrated because as people with lupus, we don't feel good all the time. If you've got any symptoms, you're probably not full of energy. So definitely if you're tired of trying kind of shooting blindly in the dark, you're in the right place. And of course, you're in the right place if you're ready to use all the tools in your toolkit in terms of your diet and your lifestyle to feel your best. So I know that I can't see everyone, but we can just do an imaginary show of hands. If you have ever been told by a doctor, a healthcare practitioner, someone that diet makes no difference for lupus. And of course, I can't really see you, but the comments are coming in. Hello, hello. Thank you for the people that are joining today. It's absolutely wonderful to have you. So I'll just see a pretend show of hands because almost everyone has told me that they've been told this before, but they decided, maybe I should give this a whirl. I mean, the food that we eat breaks down into tiny little pieces, and that's what your body is made of. So the you of 30 years ago, you've had to, of course, change and refresh. So the diet does make a big difference in who we are and our energy and how we feel. So let's get started. The first thing that I want to do is a small introduction of myself. Who am I? So my name is Tanya. I am the lupus dietitian. I have lupus myself, actually. I was diagnosed about 8 years ago and felt terrible when I was first diagnosed. I've had a lifelong struggle with autoimmune diseases, and that's actually what got me into being a dietitian and going down the path of nutrition. So when I was diagnosed with lupus, I said, wait a minute, I'm eating quote unquote healthy. I don't understand why this isn't serving me well. So I did do the first of the options that I had set out of trial and error over a very long time, looking at all the research of what could potentially help me out. And I did find out what helps me personally, and each person with lupus is different. So there's not a one size fits all best diet. But through those dietary changes, I was able to completely eliminate my symptoms and put them all into remission. So I haven't had a flare or a symptom come up for more than 6.5 years. And now I help others. Unfortunately, people with lupus are really underserved. So not only are kind of rheumatologists hard to get a hold of, there certainly are not dietitians or other practitioners specializing in lupus specifically. So that's what I'm here for, and I help a lot of people. Anyway, I'm going to help you right now. So let's talk about dietary triggers and, of course, what to replace them with. Now, every single person with lupus, if you know anyone else with lupus, if you're in a support group, you'll have noticed this already. Each person has their own symptoms, their own triggers in terms of, oh, somebody maybe doesn't get a good night's rest and then they feel that their symptoms start to flare. Or a lot of people with lupus, perhaps they had a little much too much sun exposure, and then whoop, their symptoms flare. So everybody with lupus also has a different collection of symptoms. No two people or presentations is exactly alike, which is really tricky, definitely. And then the solutions to those problems are not going to be, here you go, do the one thing and that's going to work for everyone. So it's definitely a process. You do have to check in with yourself as you're making these changes. And of course, always, always, always speak to your doctors, speak to your healthcare practitioners, make sure that everyone's on the same page, certainly before making any big changes, but also I would advise against kind of drastic changes in general. But make sure everyone's on the same page so that you can learn from the experience together too. So if you are thinking already, dietary triggers, what should I do about them? The list of things that could be a dietary trigger are quite long. And just as I had said before, they're quite different. Different people have different triggers in different settings. So I will start off with, how can you identify that perhaps you've consumed something that's a trigger? So signs of a trigger food, or perhaps something that you've done in your life that is a trigger for your flares. So we talked about the sun exposure, but in terms of the food, stomach ache or cramps, diarrhea, constipation, headache. Now, headache could come from trigger action as well, but usually those digestive systems are pretty correlated with our food. Just a general ill feeling, and of course, return of whatever your lupus symptoms are. So some people really have problems with joint pain, muscle pain, joint swelling, rashes, whether that's the malar rash or anywhere else on your body. Sometimes people struggle with hair loss as well, or just overall ill mood. So depressed feeling, anxiety, brain fog is something certainly that people struggle with a lot. So if you're finding yourself feeling way off, perhaps that's a really good time to look back. Whether it is a diet, that may be within the last 3 to 5 days. If perhaps you had a lot of sun exposure on a Saturday and you start feeling a little bit poor on Wednesday or Thursday, it could have been that sun exposure. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer to kind of affect how your overall well-being is. Now, here's a very interesting part about these dietary triggers and what to keep in mind as we're talking about what to replace them with, is that your reaction, so these signs and symptoms to a trigger food or a trigger action, really depends on a variety of factors of you. So it depends on your nutrient status. Certainly people, let's say they're deficient in a vitamin, or they just had a stomach bug and maybe had a lot of nausea and vomiting and are just kind of in a depleted state to begin with, may have more foods that are triggering or a worse reaction to a food that is a trigger. Also, unfortunately, and we live in a very stressful time, stress. So if you're at a higher level of stress, especially for all those teachers that just finished out this school year, they're at a very, very high level of stress, and then it's summertime. So a food that maybe gave you a really bad stomach ache while you were feeling really stressed, maybe in a couple weeks when you're relaxed and finally caught up on sleep, maybe you don't have that reaction. So that can be a really important factor to take into account too. Now, sleep, we all know that when we're sleep deprived, we're probably not at our best, and it's very true as well for consuming trigger foods or doing things that are a little bit more stressful on your system. If you're already sleep deprived, it makes it worse. Activity level, if you've been doing too much or maybe you've been resting and relaxing, that will affect how you react to a trigger food. Your genetics, sometimes people genetically are just more prone to something like lactose intolerance. Your health history, certainly. If you have any food allergies, of course, that's something to keep in mind. And your progress in recovery and your reduction of inflammation. So unfortunately, we know that lupus, all of these autoimmune diseases are essentially inflammation gone wild. And then having these different symptoms are just different point of view of that inflammation or different permutations of that inflammation. So we have to be mindful of how well you've been feeling over the past couple months, how well you've been controlled. Did you just come out of a flare? Or was your last flare 2 years ago and you've been doing really, really well? All of that plays a really, really big part in how you feel. So, talking back about what do we do with these triggers? What are our triggers? The very, very most basic place to start in terms of triggers is being mindful of the processed foods in our life and in our diet. So, for example, we talked briefly upon last time. And if you missed last one, please go back and visit, rewatch it, or just watch it for your first one. And it was lupus nutrition for the whole family. So we touched upon this a little bit. And what I brought up first was ultra processed foods. So ultra processed foods would be something like fast food, a frozen TV dinner, microwave dinner, anything that has a shelf life for a really long time and a pretty long list of ingredients is a pretty good indication. Now, granted, honey can last 1,000 years, but other things, long ingredient list, is a good indication that it's a pretty processed food. So those ultra processed foods not only are not so nutritious for us, but also have a lot of additives and preservatives and food coloring, all sorts of things that maybe our body doesn't really like in such big amounts. So I would say the first thing that we can do in terms of eliminating potential triggers is stepping back from the ultra processed foods down to, let's say, minimally processed or fresh foods. So right there, you're already getting many more antioxidants, phytochemicals. We know that those are really helpful for reducing inflammation, and vitamins, minerals, nutrients in their original state. Not that those processed foods don't have it, but it's oftentimes added after the fact. One of the things that is in ultra processed foods that we know is a trigger for lupus is oftentimes written as yellow number 5, or tartrazine. So this is a food coloring. It's often added to foods that are kind of yellow or orange or red to give it that color. And unfortunately, we know that there is a component of this that can actually cause lupus symptoms, lupus flares. Certainly, we're not consuming it in very big portions when it's such a smidgen of the ingredient list. However, if you can avoid it completely, that's a really easy trigger that you can be confident, okay, I'm not getting the yellow number 5 at all. So in the ultra processed foods realm, I would say certainly look for food colorings that we know aren't so great for us. So yellow number 5 specifically for lupus, but also blue number 1, red number 50. Those are sorts of things that we know have effects, and if you can avoid them, the better. Other things in the ultra processed food realm that can potentially be triggers are the saturated fats and the trans fats. So these fats would be things like animal fats. Trans fats, thankfully, is being removed from our food system gradually. That would be the sorts of fats that are more shelf stable. That's why they're called trans fats. They've changed the positioning of its composition, but that's in margarine or baked goods, like, let's say, more from not your home family-owned bakery, but a big factory bakery that's providing things like croissants that actually stay fresh for days and days. So that usually has this sort of trans fat in it. What you can find on the ingredient list as an indicator that it's a trans fat would be hydrogenated vegetable oil. And it's a couple different oils that could be hydrogenated, but that's the key word. So you definitely want to avoid foods that have that. And sometimes people say, well, can't I just look at the food label? Great question. So unfortunately, if it's less than 0.5 grams of a trans fat, if it's lower than that, they can just put 0 because the rule is if it's less than half a gram, they can just put 0. But that half a gram still can be somewhat problematic. So we've talked about processed foods. Now we're talking about not only the food colorings and the preservatives, but those trans fats and the saturated fats. We know that saturated fats over time are not great for us in terms of heart disease. We can certainly have some in your diet. So this is another question I get a lot. Well, what about coconut oil? That's something that's pretty healthy, but it does have saturated fats. Great question. So it's really in terms of your overall picture of what you're consuming. So they actually have a name for it. It's called the SAD diet, which, forgive me, I don't know who named it, but it's short for Standard American Diet. So it's a very processed diet. It's relying on a lot of processed foods. So if we're moving away from the SAD diet or the westernized diet, very processed, moving towards more natural foods, then you could have something like coconut oil, which has a little bit of saturated fats, in balance with all of those fresh foods, the fresh fruits and vegetables, and actually be a-okay. It's more like if you're consuming a lot of fast food, which has a lot of saturated fat and may even still have quite a bit of those trans fats in there, and then you're not consuming any fresh vegetables, any unprocessed things, now you're getting a lot of those preservatives and food colorings and saturated fat and trans fat all together, and it's kind of creating a storm of a place that you don't really want to be. So we've covered those two. The other triggers to be mindful of. Now, these are kind of you may say, yeah, of course, but to discuss it. So of course, excessive alcohol intake is not so great for us. There's a fair amount of research about smaller intakes of alcohol. The recommendation at this point is 1 glass a day for women, 2 glasses a day for men. Some people tolerate that just fine, especially something like a red wine, and do okay. Other people really do not tolerate alcohol well. You have to know yourself. This is one of those cases of some people are okay. Alcohol, I would not generally recommend any more than that for people with lupus. And if you find that you're sensitive and not feeling so well, maybe eliminate it for a little while and then you could reintroduce it and see how you do. Anyway, so excessive alcohol. And then we touched upon this last time as well, that we want to be careful with salt intake. So unfortunately, people with lupus are a little bit more prone to things like heart disease. And so when you reduce your salt intake or just have a moderate salt intake, not an excessively high one, it does help keep your blood pressure down, which helps with your heart health overall. The other triggers, dietary triggers that you will find a lot of places, it's mentioned quite a lot, are alfalfa sprouts. And for some reason, the alfalfa sprout family has a component in there that also has been shown to be triggering for lupus. So those may be the bean sprouts that are on something like pho or pad thai. They are used in quite a couple different dishes and variety of cuisines. So perhaps if you really enjoy those, maybe just take them off, ask that they not be added into your dish. If you're preparing at home, just hold off on those alfalfa sprouts and see, again, if that helps you out. Other things to be careful of that are triggers for not necessarily specifically for lupus, but for everybody, would be excessive sugar intake. So we know that sugar tastes delicious, sure, but it also can be inflammatory, especially if you're consuming a lot of it. Let's say you were consuming a soda that has a lot of high fructose corn syrup, and then maybe later on you were having something like juice, and it is a natural sugar, but with all of that kind of separated from the food itself, it can raise your blood sugar quite quickly. And that blood sugar rise and fall is pretty inflammatory for us. So I would say tone it down on the sugars, especially in liquid form or like candy, anything processed. And then if you want something sweet, go ahead and have something like a fresh fruit, or you can even use those fruits and make something like a dessert. So for example, you could chop up apples, put it with cinnamon, make kind of like almost a roasted apple pie, but with the apple itself. You can always make something like berries with a bit of ice cream, but not go for like a double-sized milkshake that has a lot of added sugar. So there's definitely ways to pare it down slowly over time. That you don't feel deprived. If you're a big, let's say, add a lot of sugar into your coffee or tea in the morning, what I would recommend there is just, again, taper it down slowly. So it gives your taste buds time to readjust and decrease how sweet it needs to be for your taste or your tongue to say, oh, this is still sweet. And so actually our taste buds change quite quickly. So within a month's time, you may realize, oh, wow, I'm using 1 spoonful of sugar, whereas before I used 3 spoonfuls of sugar, and this still tastes fine. I've actually done this with someone who had, I kid you not, whenever she would go to, let's say, a coffee shop, wherever they're putting pumps of things in, she would have extra, double the pumps, and then the additives in there and whipped cream on top. And then she tapered it all the way down to essentially like an iced coffee with maybe a packet or two of sugar. And she said, I can't even imagine going back to where I was. But back then, that's what I needed for it to taste sweet. So we can all make changes gradually, and you may turn around at one point and look back and say, wow, look how far I've come. So those are some of the really basic triggers. Now, you may have seen online, and this is where it gets to the point where you should really work with a doctor, a dietitian, someone like me, someone in your area, whomever it may be that you trust and know as an expert, because there's a list of triggers that you may find online that really depend on the person. So for example, sometimes people cut out things like the legume family. They're called lectins. Sometimes people are careful with foods called nightshades. Those would be tomatoes, tomatillos, potato, kind of a family of vegetables. And so they can be careful with those because they feel like that's a trigger. Gluten, dairy, grains. There's quite a long list of foods that some people feel as though can be a trigger for them. But we want you to, of course, have a nutritionally complete diet and not overly restrict yourself. So when it's getting to be eliminating full food groups, always work with someone, a healthcare practitioner, to make sure that you're also getting all the nutrition that you need. Now, I've told you a lot of things, okay, we have to be careful with, or maybe talk to your doctor about. I'm sure you also want to know, well, what am I supposed to be eating? Great question. So I doubt you will be surprised that we should all eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. Now, there were some of those categories, the nightshade vegetables, for example, where, okay, well, you told me to eat vegetables. What about these? Great question. And again, work with a professional on that. But in general, so the cruciferous vegetables, there's a lot of people not getting enough of those. So broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, omega-3s are a very healthy fat that we could all stand to use a little bit more of or get a little bit more of in our diet. And those could be coming from foods like salmon or tuna, sardines, or the vegan sources of omega-3s could be something like ground flaxseed, chia seeds, walnuts, and there are some other sources. But so those are some ideas of the healthy fats that we can put in instead of those saturated fats or trans fats. Quercetin is something that is found in citrus and apples, parsley, tea, berries. That's something that can be very anti-inflammatory. So we could replace a food that we've eliminated with something like that. Green tea, also very anti-inflammatory. And then there's things that are probably sitting in your cabinet if you want to use the dried spices, or you can get the fresh roots, things like ginger and turmeric. Cinnamon certainly is a great idea. And then we can go into a whole world of gut health promoting foods. I touched upon it before as well. So our gut health is really intertwined with our immune system health. So when we have a very poor microbiome in our gut or a leaky gut, this does affect our immune system. So there are a lot of foods out there that can be these replacement foods that actually help our gut health. So it could be bone broth or probiotic foods combined with prebiotic fibers, collagen, fermented foods. Fermented foods is a big category. Actually, almost every single culture in traditional cuisine has some sort of fermented food in there. Some examples could be kimchi or sauerkraut, miso, kombucha. That's become really popular these days. And there's a lot of other really nutrient dense foods that we could touch upon, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. I do want to, of course, answer some questions. Let's see what we've gotten in. Alrighty, so first question. Oh, someone just shared that they really struggle with the heat and the sun. Definitely. I believe the statistic that I read is 60 to 70% of people with lupus are also photosensitive, which means if they're getting too much UV light, and that could be from the sun, that could be from fluorescent lights, that it basically can lead to a lupus flare and lupus symptoms. So be really careful with that. Certainly wear a sun hat, stay in the shade, try to miss the peak hours of sunshine, let's say from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. I know a lot of people that enjoy walking and they'll go in the evening, so it's not such direct sunlight. Thank you for sharing. Oh, someone else asked about very frequent bowel movements. Great question. The fact that you're saying it's up to 12 times a day and asking, could that be a flare? Certainly, that's a lot. So I would definitively put that in the category of diarrhea because that's quite often. Also, really, really, it's so important to make sure that you're replacing those fluids, not only with water, because you need electrolytes to be able to absorb that water. Potassium, sodium, magnesium. These are really important to maintain your hydration status. So sports drinks are not necessarily my favorite. There's a lot of other things that you can do in there to be able to replete, but also it depends. I don't know you personally. It depends on your kidney health of how much we can replete with some of those electrolytes. So if you're having that and it's lasting, let's say more than one day, please talk to your doctor to make sure that you're maintaining your hydration appropriately, especially during this heat. It's really, really, that can get you into a place of feeling very poorly very quickly. And I'm sorry that you're going through that. Someone shared that they thought about taking a food allergy test. That's definitely something that could be helpful. The one thing that I will say, and if you remember, I talked about it with the triggers, is that your reaction may depend based upon how much inflammation you have in your body at the moment. So if you're super inflamed, you may have a couple false positives of foods that you're sensitive to just because you have so much inflammation. So that does get a little bit tricky sometimes. All right, let me see. Thank you so much for sharing such great questions. Oh, great. So one person is asking, what should you eat after you've eaten some trigger foods? Is there safe foods or items that can help calm things down? Fantastic question. So it's all dependent on you as an individual. So if there are foods that you know that you tolerate really well, maybe some kind of classic recipes that you keep in your back pocket, think about the sorts of things that we do when we don't feel well in general. Like maybe there's a soup that you always prepare that really helps you feel much better. Maybe there's some simple recipes that really help. I would always just fall back on those things that are safe foods. And then, of course, we want it to be as nutrient dense as possible to replete some of those vitamins and minerals if you had something like what our other participant was commenting on, of having 12 bowel movements a day. Someone commented, please don't take my wine. I think if you're drinking about 6 sips and you're done anyway, that sounds more like perhaps nostalgia or tradition or just enjoying the taste of it. That's not very much quantity. Um, okay, so another question. Oh, great. If you have a sweet tooth, is there a way to have a more healthy dessert? Or if you're in a restaurant, is there a specific dessert option that's better? That's a great question. So, no one really likes to order the fruit bowl. It's kind of boring. I get it. In restaurants, that's a little bit tricky. They usually are making things a little bit more complicated in terms of the ingredients. But let's go with an example of someone perhaps that has an intolerance to dairy for whatever reason. Maybe if they're somewhere, they could have something like a sorbet or a fruit ice. So that way they're having ice cream with their family, their friends, or at a social event, but they're having something that's dairy free. And that could be a nice option as a replacement. Also, thankfully, the choices are getting much, much better these days. So let's say gluten is your trigger or a trigger of yours. There are so many more gluten-free options than ever before. So if you're out and about, even cookie shops these days will at least offer usually one gluten-free muffin or cookie. So you don't feel like, okay, I have no options at all. There usually are a little bit more out there. Oh, great question. So thank you so much. I actually did want to talk about this, and I thought a question would come in about it. So is garlic and onion triggering for lupus flares? Fantastic question. So garlic is our let's say a food that's kind of on the fence. There are so many benefits of garlic. It is very high in antioxidants. It has a lot of phytochemicals. However, there are a subset of people that really do quite poorly with garlic. So how I always caution people is, unfortunately, you may not know until you consume it yourself. And some people yes, and some people no. Now, onion, I would say, is almost consistently something that people can tolerate pretty well. Onions, the family of onions, like leeks, onions themselves, spring onions, that whole family actually is very high in prebiotic fiber. So that could be helpful for your gut health. However, we're all special and we're all individual. So sometimes people might have something like a little bit of like belching after consuming something that's high in onions, and maybe it's for other reasons, but sometimes people just don't tolerate foods for whatever reason. If you already know that you don't tolerate onions, continue to avoid, maybe until we get to a place where your inflammation is way down, and maybe then you tolerate it just fine. Someone mentioned that they have a sugar problem. I've got to control that. Great question. So, it may not be a sugar problem. And you may say, what? So oftentimes we go for sugar when we're tired, when we haven't eaten in a while, when we feel like we need a pick-me-up. So if you're just struggling with overall fatigue, which is certainly something with that a lot of people with lupus have, you may be feeling, oh, I need a sugar pick-me-up, because it does give you a little boost of energy for a moment. However, it may just be that you're really tired. Or sometimes people aren't as consistent with their meals throughout the day, and maybe you're just hungry. Our body craves, basically is not such a great messenger, if that makes sense. So when we're dehydrated, our body says, give me something. And it may just be that you're dehydrated and you need water, but it's confusing to figure out if that signal is food, sugar, fluids, whatever it may be, but it may just be dehydration. If you're tired, your body is saying, give me something. And it's hard to figure out if it's sugar, again, fluids, if you're just dehydrated, water, or food, if you're just been too long since your last meal. And maybe you do have low blood sugar, and then your body's saying, give me something. And it's hard to tell if sugar is the thing you need. So that's certainly, I work with people a lot on figuring out the kind of vague message from their body of, give me something. Okay, so let's keep going through the questions. Thank you all so much for asking such fantastic questions. Oh, great question. So it's about nightshades, and are they easier to tolerate if they're cooked or raw? Great question. So that really depends on the person. Sometimes people can squeak by if they don't tolerate nightshades by consuming maybe a small portion of one of the nightshades. But I haven't found it consistently with people. Oh, if you can have it in small amounts, you can have it cooked. Some people are just really, really sensitive to nightshades overall. One workaround that I've seen is that people like they love the taste of garlic but can't consume garlic. Sometimes they'll put garlic cloves into a bottle of oil and they have a garlic infused oil so that they get the flavor but not the actual chunks of it. Oh, another question about alfalfa. Yep. So alfalfa was mentioned. We did briefly touch upon it, and that is one of the foods that can be triggering for lupus. So I would recommend staying away from it. Those alfalfa sprouts are usually put on the top of things or in a stir fry. So sometimes they're just labeled as bean sprouts. I would err on the side of avoiding that if you can. Now, I have hit all the questions. If you are here and you have any last questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. I'm happy to answer them before I head out. Otherwise, I really, really appreciate your attention today and your fantastic questions. Again, my name is Tanya. I am the Lupus Dietitian on all social media. So if you want to stay in the loop with all of these nutrition tips and advice that I give people, go ahead to my website, which is www.thelupusdietitian. And if you're from another country, in the US, we do spell it with both T's. Elsewhere, sometimes they spell it differently, .com. So thelupusdietitian.com. And you can sign up for my blog post and just stay in the loop. I post a lot of great stuff. Anytime there's any sort of new lupus information, I'll usually post about it. So that way you can stay in touch and get the first look at new information about lupus related to diet and lifestyle. Yeah. So thank you all so much. Let me just double check one last time. No, I just see a lot of thank yous coming in. Thank you. And I really hope to connect with all of you outside of this. Otherwise, enjoy your summertime and thanks so much. Take care.